The Last Train Out of Manhattan. Part 1. The Descent into Stillness. The digital clock on his phone blinked a merciless 10:48 p.m. For Leo, the number wasn't just a time, it was a verdict. It was the sum total of another day sacrificed at the altar of quarterly reports, stakeholder presentations, and the soul-crushing politeness of corporate emails. His body was a hollowed-out shell, his mind a blur of fading flowcharts and the phantom taste of stale coffee. All he craved was the familiar, grimy embrace of the 6 train, the rhythmic lull of its wheels, and the 23 minutes of blessed unconsciousness it would grant him before his stop in the Bronx. The descent into the 33rd Street station was a journey into a different, more honest world. The gleaming marble and forced cheer of his office building were replaced by cracked tiles, the distant wail of a saxophone from a busker who had long since given up on hope, and the pervasive, damp smell of ozone, urine, and ancient dust. The platform was sparsely populated with the city's late-night ghosts, a janitor staring into the middle distance with infinite weariness, a couple arguing in hushed, sharp tones, a group of teenagers sharing a single pair of earbuds, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of their phones. Leo found his usual spot, a worn patch of concrete near a peeling advertisement for a bankruptcy lawyer. He leaned against the cold steel beam, closing his eyes, trying to push back the headache blooming behind his temples. The world narrowed to the distant, growing rumble that promised deliverance. A gust of warm, stale air announced the train's arrival, its headlights cutting twin beams through the tunnel's gloom. The car he stepped into was about half full. It was the same mosaic of urban isolation he saw every night. He slid into a seat near the middle doors, his briefcase a leather-clad coffin for his ambitions resting on his knees. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. The first rule of the late-night subway was to acknowledge no one, to become a part of the scenery, a non-entity. He glanced at his reflection in the grimy window, a pale, thinning man in a rumpled suit, his tie loosened like a noose that had failed to do its job. He looked away. The doors hissed shut with a finality that, tonight, felt different, heavier. The train lurched forward, and the familiar cacophony of clattering wheels, screeching metal, and rushing air filled the car. Leo leaned his head against the glass, feeling the vibrations travel through his skull. He watched the darkness of the tunnel become a strobe light of maintenance rooms, signal lights, and graffiti-covered walls, a fleeting secret city rushing past. They made the first stop at Grand Central without incident. A few people got off, a few got on. The silence in the car was profound, broken only by the rustle of a newspaper and the tinny hiss of music leaking from someone's headphones. As they pulled out, heading for the underwater stretch to 51st Street, Leo felt the first tremor. It was subtle, a slight shimmy in the train's motion that was just a little too violent to be normal. He opened his eyes, a prickle of unease running down his spine. The lights above flickered once, twice then died, plunging the car into absolute blackness. For a heart-stopping second, there was only the scream of the brakes. It was a sound of pure metal agony, a high-pitched shriek that tore through the darkness and grated against every nerve. Leo was thrown forward, his briefcase flying from his lap as his shoulders slammed into the hard plastic of the seat in front of him. Around him, he heard the thuds and yelps of other passengers meeting a similar fate. The train shuddered violently, metal groaning in protest, before it ground to a complete, jarring halt. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. The constant hum of the air conditioning was gone. The only sound was the frantic beating of his own heart in his ears and the faint, panicked breathing of the others. "Hey, what the hell?" A man's voice boomed from the far end of the car. "Everyone stay calm." Another voice, this one female and trying for authority, cut through the dark. "It's probably just a power surge. The lights will be back on in a second." But the seconds stretched into a minute. The darkness remained, a physical presence pressing in on them. Leo fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy. He swiped the screen, and the sudden bright light was a small miracle. A dozen other pinpricks of light bloomed in the car as others did the same. "Shit, no service," someone muttered, a statement that was quickly echoed around the car. Leo looked at the top corner of his screen. No bars, just the stark icon of a solitary triangle. They were cut off. Then the crackle of the intercom system made everyone jump. It wasn't the clear, if often garbled, voice of a conductor. It was a burst of static, underneath which was a chaos of sound that made Leo's blood run cold. There were shouts, distorted and frantic, a sharp, percussive sound that could only be a gunshot. And then, a sound that didn't belong, a guttural, wet snarling that raised the hairs on his arms. It was cut off by another explosion of static, and then silence from the speakers. The true panic began then. It started as a low murmur, a current of fear that electrified the stale air. What was that? Were those gunshots? Did you hear that? That noise? Let me out, I have to get out of here. A woman started to shriek, her voice climbing into hysteria. In the glow of the phone lights, faces were etched with terror. Leo saw the janitor, his earlier weariness replaced by wide-eyed fear. The arguing couple were now clinging to each other. The teenagers had huddled together, their bravado completely gone. Clang. The sound came from outside the car. A heavy metallic impact against the door at the far end. Everyone froze, their breath held. It came again, clang, more insistent this time, followed by a low, scraping sound. Then a new sound joined it. A soft, wet thudding. It was the sound of something being hit, over and over. And then a whisper, so faint they all strained to hear it. "Help. Me." It was a man's voice, ragged and choked with pain. A large man in a construction worker's vest, whom Leo had barely registered before, stood up. "Someone's out there. We have to help him." "Don't you open that door," the woman with the authoritative voice snapped. She was standing now too, a silhouette in the dim light. "Didn't you hear what was on that radio? There's something wrong out there." "The man needs help," the construction worker insisted, moving toward the door. "It's a trick," a new voice said, quiet but firm. It belonged to a younger man with sharp, intelligent eyes, his face illuminated by his phone. He was looking at something on his screen, his expression grim. That sound, the snarling. I've heard it before, in emergency broadcasts from the financial district this afternoon. They said it was contained. Contained? What was contained? Leo heard himself ask, his own voice sounding alien. Before the young man could answer, the door at the end of the car shuddered violently. Not a knock this time, but an impact, as if a body had been thrown against it. A spiderweb of cracks appeared in the safety glass window. Pressed against it was a face. It was a man in a torn business suit, his eyes wide and unseeing, his mouth slack. Blood poured from a gash on his forehead, tracing dark lines down his pale skin. He moaned, a low, empty sound, and then started to pound his head against the glass. Thump, 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 with a horrifying mechanical rhythm. The woman who had been screaming earlier let out a full-blown, piercing shriek. It was the sound that broke the last vestiges of order. The car erupted into chaos. People scrambled away from the door, tripping over seats and each other. The construction worker backed away, his bravado gone, replaced by primal fear. The thing outside, the man who was no longer a man, continued to beat its head against the reinforced glass, the cracks spreading with each wet, sickening impact. Leo sat frozen, his phone clutched in his hand like a talisman. The world of quarterly reports and stakeholder presentations was gone, vaporized in an instant. They were in a metal coffin, buried deep beneath the earth, and something was outside, trying to get in. and from the sounds coming from the other end of the car, it seemed it wasn't the only one. The last train from Manhattan had become a tomb, and the burial was just beginning. Part 2. The Cracks Within. The head-pounding stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The man in the torn suit slid down the window, leaving a gruesome smear of blood and matted hair on the glass, and disappeared from view into the impenetrable darkness of the tunnel. The silence he left behind was somehow more terrifying. It was a listening silence, a predatory pause. For a full minute, nobody in the car moved or spoke. They were a collection of statues, frozen in poses of flight and fear, illuminated only by the trembling, inadequate light of their phones. The only sounds were the ragged symphony of their breathing and the faint, dripping noise from the other side of the door. It was the young man with the sharp eyes who broke the spell. "My name is Ben," he said, his voice low but carrying through the car. He held up his phone, not as a light, but to show his screen. On it was a cached news article. The headline was stark. "Unconfirmed reports of mass hostility in Lower Manhattan. Authorities urge calm." Mass hostility? The construction worker, who had introduced himself as Ray, spat the words out. "What the hell does that mean? That guy he was insane." "It's more than that," Ben said, scrolling down. "The report started this afternoon. People attacking each other, biting. They're not stopping when they're hurt. They just keep coming." He looked around at the circle of terrified faces. "I think we all heard what was on that radio. The gunshots. Those sounds. I don't think that was a riot. I think we're in the middle of an outbreak." The word hung in the air, heavy and absurd. An outbreak. It was a term from movies, from video games, not from the 6th train on a Tuesday night. "That's insane," the authoritative woman said. She was a tall, sharp-featured woman in her 50s named Carol, who had announced she was a building manager. "There is a logical explanation for this. A gas leak, perhaps. Mass hysteria. We need to remain calm and wait for rescue." "Wait?" A woman named Maria, the one who had been clinging to her partner, cried out. "Wait for what? For those things to break through? Did you see his eyes? There was nothing there. Nothing." Her partner, David, tried to shush her, but his own hands were shaking violently. Leo finally found his voice. It came out as a croak. "The emergency tools. There's an axe behind that panel." He pointed a trembling finger at a small, red-framed panel near one of the doors. "And there are emergency hatches on the roof." All eyes turned to him. He felt a flush of self-consciousness. He was Leo, the office worker, the number cruncher. He wasn't a leader. He suggested things in meetings. He didn't give orders in life-or-death situations. Ray, the construction worker, was on his feet immediately. He moved to the panel and, with a grunt, pried it open. Inside was a fire axe, its red paint bright and garish in the phone light. He hefted it, and the simple act of arming himself shifted the dynamics in the car. Power, once diffused by fear, now coalesced around the man with the weapon. "Right, the roof," Ray said, his confidence returning. "We can get out, walk along the top of the train, get to the next station." "That's a terrible idea," Ben countered, standing up. "We have no idea what's in that tunnel. It's pitch black. We could walk right into a live third rail, or into a crowd of those things. In here, we have a defensible position." "Defensible?" Ray laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You saw that door. It's already cracked. How long do you think it'll hold if a dozen of those freaks start pounding on it? We're sitting ducks in this can." "He's right," Carol said, siding with Ray. "Staying here is a death sentence. We must take proactive measures." A low moan echoed from the tunnel, followed by a series of scuffling footsteps. They weren't the purposeful steps of rescuers. They were shuffling, dragging, erratic. Multiple sets of them. They were gathering. The debate was cut short. The fear was a living thing now, coiling in the stale air. A faction was forming around Ray and his axe. Others, including the elderly janitor, Mr. Henderson, and the group of teenagers, looked to Ben for guidance, for the cold comfort of logic. Leo felt paralyzed. Ray's plan was reckless, but Ben's plan felt like passive waiting for slaughter. He looked at his phone. 11:17 p.m. They had been down here for less than half an hour. It felt like a lifetime. A new sound started, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the roof of the car. Tap, tap, tap. It moved from one end to the other, slow and deliberate. Everyone looked up, their faces pale ovals in the gloom. It wasn't the frantic pounding of the infected. This was different. This was searching. "Something's up there," one of the teenagers, a girl with purple streaks in her hair, whispered, her voice cracking with terror. Ray tightened his grip on the axe, his knuckles white. "That's it. We're not waiting. We're going, now. Who's with me?" About half the car shuffled towards him, Carol, a few other men and women driven by a desperate need for action. The other half, including Maria and David, Ben and Mr. Henderson, stayed back. "You'll be killed," Ben said, his voice flat. "Or worse, you'll lead them right back to us." "This is our only chance," Ray roared, his patience snapping. He pointed the axe at Ben. "You can stay here and die if you want. I'm getting out." The social contract, that thin, invisible film that held civilization together, was tearing. It was no longer us against them. It was us against us. The true enemy was no longer just outside the metal shell. It was inside, festering in their own fear and suspicion. Ray moved to the emergency hatch located in the center of the ceiling. He reached up, his fingers finding the recessed latch. "Don't!" Ben shouted, stepping forward. It was too late. Ray pulled the release. There was a hiss of pressurized air, and the heavy hatch swung downward on its hinges, revealing a square of utter blackness. The tapping on the roof stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. Ray shone his phone up into the opening, the light swallowed by the oppressive dark. He gestured to a younger man. "Give me a boost. I'll take a quick look." The man, hesitant but cowed by Ray's intensity, linked his hands together. Ray placed a foot in them, axe still in one hand, and was hoisted up. His upper body disappeared into the hatch. The silence was absolute. Everyone watched, their breath held. Then, a sound. A low, wet growl directly above them. Ray's body went rigid. He let out a strangled cry, more of surprise than pain. Then he was yanked upward with incredible force. His legs kicked wildly for a second, and then he was gone. The only thing that fell back into the car was his phone, which clattered to the floor, its screen shattering into a web of black and white. A woman screamed. The man who had boosted Ray up stared, dumbfounded, at the empty space where Ray had been. Then, a single drop of something warm and dark splattered onto his face. He wiped it away, looked at his red-smeared fingers, and began to whimper. From the open hatch, a face peered down. It was pale and gaunt, its eyes milky white. Its mouth was stained a dark reddish-black. It let out a guttural snarl and then disappeared. Pandemonium. The remaining followers of Ray scrambled back from the hatch, crashing into seats and each other. Carol was hyperventilating, her face ashen. The axe was gone. Their leader was gone. Their plan was a catastrophic failure. Ben moved swiftly. "Help me!" He yelled at Leo and David. Together they jumped, grabbing the dangling hatch and forcing it shut. The latch clicked back into place, but it felt flimsy, a pathetic barrier against what was now known to be up there. The cost of their division was now horrifyingly clear. They had lost their only real weapon and a strong pair of hands. They had revealed their position. And they had learned a terrible new truth. The danger wasn't just at the doors. It was above them, all around them. The whimpering from the man with Ray's blood on his face turned into a low, steady moan. He was curling into a fetal position on the floor, lost to shock. The rest of them stood in the near darkness, the ghost of Ray's final aborted scream echoing in their minds. They were fewer now. They were weaponless, and they were utterly, completely trapped. The cracks had appeared not just in the glass, but in their very humanity. And through those cracks, the darkness was pouring in. Part 3. A Flicker in the Dark. The whimpering man on the floor was named Kevin. His soft, broken sounds were the new soundtrack to their hell, a constant reminder of Ray's gruesome end. The initial chaotic panic had subsided, replaced by a cold, grinding dread. They were rats in a metal cage, and the predators knew exactly where they were. Ben had taken de facto command. With Ray gone and Carol reduced to a silent, shivering wreck, his calm, analytical demeanor was the only anchor they had left. He organized what little they had. Phones were to be used sparingly, one at a time, to conserve battery. They had no weapons, save for a few keys, a heavy thermos Mr. Henderson produced from his janitorial cart, and Leo's briefcase, which felt absurdly flimsy as a means of defense. "We can't stay here," Ben said, his voice low. He was shining his phone's light on the cracked door window where the infected man had been. The web of cracks was worse, a fragile mosaic. "That won't hold much longer, and the roof is compromised. Our only way out is through the front of the train, to the driver's cab. Maybe we can get out through there, onto the tracks." "And then what?" Maria asked, her voice hollow. "Walk through a dark tunnel filled with those things?" "It's that, or wait to be butchered," Ben replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The third rail is on the right side. We stick to the left. We move quietly, and we move together. The 51st Street station can't be more than a few hundred yards away." The plan was a thread of hope, thin and fragile. But it was all they had. It gave them a purpose, a direction, something to focus on besides the suffocating fear. They formed a single-file line. Ben would lead, holding the thermos. Leo, surprising himself, volunteered to take the rear. David was behind Ben, then Maria, Carol being half-carried by Mr. Henderson, the shell-shocked teenagers, and finally, Kevin, who was pulled to his feet but was clearly non-compos mentis. The door to the next car was their first obstacle. Ben peered through the small window. "It's clear," he whispered, though the word felt like a lie in this place. "But the lights are out there, too." He pulled the manual release. The door slid open with a reluctant groan that sounded deafening in the silence. A wave of foul air hit them, the coppery tang of blood mixed with the stench of voided bowels. Ben stepped through, his phone light sweeping the car. It was a charnel house. Bodies were strewn across the seats and the floor. Some were clearly dead, their throats torn out, limbs bent at impossible angles. Others moved. They twitched and writhed, trapped under seats or pinned by debris. One woman, her abdomen a mess of dark red, reached for them with a trembling, blood-slicked hand, a silent plea in her glazing eyes. "Don't look," Ben said, his own voice tight. "Just move, quickly and quietly." They picked their way through the nightmare gallery. Leo tried to keep his eyes on Ben's back, but his gaze was drawn to the horror. He saw a man in a security guard's uniform, his head lying at an unnatural angle, his service pistol still in its holster. The sight was like an electric shock. A weapon. A real one. He stopped, causing the line to bunch up behind him. "Ben," he hissed. Ben looked back, following Leo's pointed finger. His eyes widened. He nodded grimly and moved towards the body. It was a grisly task. He had to lean over the dead man, the smell of death overwhelming, and carefully unclip the holster. He pulled the gun free. It was a heavy black semi-automatic. Ben checked the magazine. It was full. The power in the car shifted again, instantly and irrevocably. It was no longer in the thermos. It was in the cold, hard steel of the gun in Ben's hand. He was no longer just their guide. He was their protector, their executioner, their god. They reached the far end of the car without incident, though the sounds of their passage had stirred the darkness. From behind them, in the car they had just left, came a heavy, repetitive thud. Something was trying to get in from the tunnel side again. The door to the next car was jammed. Something heavy was blocking it from the other side. Ben and David put their shoulders to it, but it wouldn't budge more than an inch. Through the crack, they could see a tangle of seats and debris. There was no way through. "We have to go back," David said, his voice cracking. "We're trapped." "The roof," Leo said, the idea forming even as he spoke it. He hated it, feared it, but it was their only option. "We go up from between the cars, the coupling area. It's riskier, but we can move along the top, bypass this car entirely." It was a desperate plan, born of a dead end. They retreated back through the carnage of the second car, the moans of the dying a horrifying chorus at their backs. As they re-entered their original car, they saw the source of the thudding. The cracked door window was now a mess of fractured glass, and a bloody fist was visible, hammering mindlessly against it. The glass was bulging inward. "No time," Ben barked. They gathered in the vestibule between the first and second cars. The wind whipped through the gap, cold and carrying the scent of the tunnel-damp concrete and ozone. Ben, with the gun tucked into his waistband, climbed onto the coupling mechanism, then reached up and, with a grunt of effort, pushed the intercar hatch open. "David, you're next. Then help the others up. Leo, you're with me on the roof. We'll provide cover." Leo's heart was a trip hammer in his chest. He climbed up, his dress shoes slipping on the metal. David followed, and together they hauled up a terrified Maria. One by one, they pulled them all up onto the roof of the train, until only Kevin was left below, staring up with vacant eyes. "Kevin, come on," David urged, reaching down. Kevin just shook his head, backing away into the dark of the car. At that moment, the cracked door finally gave way. Glass shattered, and a wave of snarling, broken figures poured into the car. Kevin turned towards the noise, let out a single pitiful scream, and was swallowed by the horde. There was no time to mourn. "Go, go, go," Ben shouted. They were on the roof now, exposed. The darkness was absolute, a solid wall of black. They used their phones, holding them like torches, the beams creating small, bobbing pools of light that did little to push back the overwhelming gloom. The train was a long, black serpent beneath them, and the tunnel stretched to infinity in both directions. Ben pointed north, towards 51st Street. "Stay low. Watch your step." They moved in a crouch, a line of terrified ghosts shuffling along the curved, slippery metal. The sounds from below were a symphony of horror snarls, crashes, the wet sounds of feeding. Then, a new sound joined it. A scrabbling from behind them. Leo shone his light back. Figures were emerging from the hatch they had just climbed out of. They moved with a jerky, insectile grace, crawling onto the roof. They were faster up here, unencumbered by seats and bodies. "They're on the roof," Leo yelled. Ben turned, raised the gun, and fired. The report was deafening in the confined space. A single world-shattering bang that left Leo's ears ringing. One of the figures jerked and tumbled off the side of the train, vanishing into the dark. The others didn't even flinch. They kept coming. "Run!" Ben screamed. They broke into a stumbling, terrified run. It was a nightmare. One wrong step, one slip, and they would fall to the tracks, to the live rail or the waiting teeth below. Leo heard a cry behind him. One of the teenagers, the boy, stumbled. His foot slipped over the edge, and he fell with a short, cut-off shriek, his body hitting the tracks with a sickening thud. They didn't stop. They couldn't. The things were gaining. Ben fired again, and again, the flashes of the gun illuminating the tunnel in stroboscopic bursts, revealing the pale, ravenous faces of their pursuers for a split second before plunging them back into darkness. Then Leo saw it. A pinprick of light in the distance. Not the bright, sterile light of a station, but a soft, warm, flickering glow. "The station!" he gasped, hope surging in his chest like a physical pain. "I see it!" It gave them a final, desperate burst of energy. They ran towards the light, their lungs burning. The station platform grew closer. They could see the tiled walls, the advertisements, and they could see the figures. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, shuffling on the platform, milling about like cattle. The hatch to the driver's cab was just ahead. Ben reached it first, yanking on the handle. It was locked. He didn't hesitate. He pointed the gun at the lock and fired. The mechanism blew apart. He kicked the hatch open and dropped down inside. One by one, they followed, tumbling into the small, dark space of the cab. It was empty. The driver's seat was vacant, a half-eaten sandwich still sitting on the console. The front window was smeared with grime, but through it, they could see the 51st Street platform and the horde that inhabited it. They had reached the front of the train, but there was no salvation here. The station was overrun. The platform was a vision of hell, a feeding ground. The flickering light came from a fire burning in a trash can, casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the tiled walls. They were out of the metal coffin, but they had simply stepped into a larger, more populous grave. Ben slumped against the console, the gun hanging limply in his hand. Maria began to sob quietly. Mr. Henderson just stared, his face a mask of defeat. Leo looked out at the nightmare on the platform. He looked at the broken people around him. He thought of his empty apartment, his unread emails, his meaningless deadlines. That life was gone, swept away in a tide of blood and darkness. This was the world now. This tunnel, this darkness, this fight for the next breath. Ben met his gaze, his own eyes filled with a terrible, exhausted resolve. He ejected the magazine from the gun, checked it, and slammed it back in with a sharp click. "The tunnel continues," Ben said, his voice a dry rasp. "We keep moving." Leo nodded slowly. There was nothing else to do. Survival was no longer about getting back to the surface. It was about moving forward, from one patch of darkness to the next, forever chasing a flicker of light that might only lead to a deeper hell. The last train from Manhattan had reached its final destination, and it was nowhere any of them had ever wanted to go.